Today is November the 7th, 2019. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University, and along with me is Larry Caldwell, retired or semi-retired from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and we are here to interview Cheryl Cheadle. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Who has been with the conservation field for 30 plus years?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for coming. And this project is going to be part of our Oklahoma's Conservation Heritage Oral History Project, which is a collaboration between the Oklahoma Conservation Historical Society, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. So that's a mouthful.
Yes, it is.
Thank you for coming. Let's begin with learning when and where you were born.
I was born November 10th, 1957 in Henrietta, Oklahoma.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about your parents.
Well, I think a lot of things about my childhood were somewhat typical for a very small town. And my mom and dad, my father had been from Oklahoma City. My mom was born in Bartlesville, so nobody had to come very far to end up landing in Henrietta. And I actually lived in Henrietta all through my childhood and graduated high school there. Then went to Northeastern A&M in Miami, Oklahoma, and then here to OSU.
In elementary school, did you have a favorite subject or teacher?
I had all of my elementary teachers were very influential. Our school was little. We would have maybe 12 children in the class, sometimes going up as high as 17. And I remember every teacher very well. And I guess I'll say something that was very meaningful to me. My sixth grade teacher, at the end of the school year, there was a time when we gave teachers a gift at the end of the school year. And at the end of my sixth grade year, a gift that I gave my teacher was I had drawn a picture of a white-tailed buck's head and antlers. And it was pretty good for, a child. But he was so taken with it that he actually framed it and had to ask me to sign it again so that my signature would show above the frame. So that was an influential thing. The biggest thing about my childhood that has been formative in who I am as an adult, other than just, I think, that small town, knowing lots of people and having a lot of good influences, was we lived a block and a half from a small stream. And this small stream, it was just a tributary to Coal Creek. It was very small. It didn't have year-round flow, but that is where I would be found. And I was a child of the 60s, and that is where I would go whenever I walked out the door of our house. If I wasn't walking to school, I was walking to that small stream where I spent many hours daydreaming and looking at the crawdads and spending time there. And that was a very meaningful thing in my life. I associate a lot of joy, a lot of natural observations with the time I spent in that small stream.
And did your mother and dad always know where you were then?
No.
No.
But that was a different time. And honestly, if you will look into this, and you can just Google roaming opportunities, but parents tend to keep children much closer to home now. And you don't have, there's no more of that. Be back in time for supper. That's a mentality that seems to have faded. But not in my hometown, not in the 60s. I had roaming rights. And I took advantage of them, as did many children at that time. And that made for a very nice childhood, and it made for me to have an openness of my heart for other creatures to a large degree. I also always had a lot of pets, and my dogs and cats were very wonderful companions.
So were you an only child then?
No, I had an older brother.
And would he go to the stream with you, the creek with you?
No.
No.
And I didn't want that. And I actually even had some friends sometimes say, hey, let me know. I'll come out and play with you. And I did love some of my childhood friendships. But it was just not unusual for me to be alone at the creek.
How far away would the creek be from your house? How big an area did you roam?
That was about a 5-minute walk. to the creek. But as far as when I hit about the 4th grade, my parents allowed me to start walking to town with a friend. And that was probably a mile and a half. So, but it was, we'd go down over to 4th Street, straight to town. And that was a good experience too, just, and we would wander in the stores together. And you just don't see much of that now, a 10-year-old kid without a parent in the store. It's a different time. Not that it's not a good time, but it's just a different time now.
How would you know what time it was to be back home in time for dinner?
Well, if you're in a little town of Henrietta, everything's shutting down at 5.
Okay.
So you don't have to worry about that.
But when you were at the creek?
At the creek? I just don't remember getting in trouble for it, so I must have just made it happen. But my parents both worked. My mother was a working mother. So she, it wasn't like dinner was at 5 o'clock. So, I had time.
And so grandparents would not have been nearby if they had come from there.
No, I had a great aunt who was also another source of an influence on me. My great aunt Molly, who was a part of my life until I believe she died when I was about 9 or 10. And my grandfather and my other grandparents lived in Oklahoma City, so did not see quite as much of them. But my grandfather I didn't spend a lot of time with him. Now, he spent time with the whole family from time to time. And my great aunt Molly, though, she was an influence. She was my grandmother's sister, and my grandmother died when I was 2. And so, but yeah, she was an influence, and she was the person who would tell the stories of before cars were common. I mean, she was born in the 1800s. So, and just one thing that comes to mind that I'll go ahead and mention here is I only have a couple of memories of my grandmother. She died when I was 2. But one of the memories is she had on kind of a gray dress with maroon paisleys on it. That's in one of my memories. And I also remember after my grandmother died, that dress got passed to my Aunt Molly. And so I remember Aunt Molly in that dress. And the last memory at all I have of that dress was it became the rags for a mop. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a statement to you use things and it's not a disposable world, as it's much more likely to be now. But I just remember that kind of unusual little cycle of how that dress went through some stages.
I thought you were going to say you were into a quilt, but by that time...
I don't remember that happening with it. Other things did, and we had quilts. Quilts were a part of my childhood, and that Aunt Molly also taught me to embroidery. And I can remember I would sit as a little child, learn to embroider, 4 or 5 years old. That was before we lived by the creek. And I would say, "Look, Aunt Molly," and she'd say, "You can do better and just rip it out." I'm like, okay. So, like I say, an early influence.
What did your mother and father do?
My mother worked at Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company, which was the big employer in Henrietta. And when I was a small child, my dad worked for a grocery warehouse. He would drive around small country stores way out in the middle of nowhere and take their orders. And he would take those orders back to Bursar Brothers, and a truck would, at some point in the next week or two, make a delivery. And that was also a really nice part. Not often, but sometimes I would go with my dad on his what we call the rounds. And that was wonderful because that was down little country roads when it was nothing to have a shop, a little store that provided food and canned things for the local people out in the middle of nowhere. And that was also a good memory of going with Dad just out in the middle of nowhere. And then Dad ended up he was kind of one of those jacks of all trades. He sold cars and did other things. He did a lot of car sales. That's where I say I got my gift of gab from my car sales dad.
And did y'all have a garden?
No.
A garden? No.
Nope.
Okay, so elementary school, 6th grade, and then when you got into high school, were you in FFA, 4-H, any of that?
No. the grade school I went to in Henrietta was like the most rural of the public school system, I believe, and that wasn't introduced to me. And so when I left 6th grade, and then they put us all together at the junior high, which it's still I graduated with 85 others, so it wasn't a tiny town. But I didn't play basketball. I didn't know really anything about 4-H, and I just didn't migrate that way. I could have. It would have been probably wonderful for me, but that just wasn't a part of my being. Now, I will tell you something critical of my early high school years. I got a horse, and my horse and I were the best of friends. That was a wonderful experience for me, was to have a horse. And I stayed busy with her to a large degree, and she had a couple of foals. And so that was kind of a big experience for me too.
So you would have had enough property to have the horse like right out your back door?
We never had property. I just would have just in that little town that size, when your parents know everybody and you know everybody. So we just found people who'd keep her for us. At one point, I know that we had to pay $10 a month for where we kept her. And if I were to have a horse in Tulsa County now, oh my goodness. So, but that again, that's the beauty of that small town and that people knowing each other.
What'd you name her?
She came named. Her name was Cricket. She came to me named.
Okay, so what's the name of the elementary school since we're talking?
Roosevelt.
Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm.
And then Henrietta High School graduated in 75?
76.
76.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And your favorite subject?
I like biology. I like the sciences. I wasn't in love with school, but I did have some good teachers. I had some good influences through the school system. And I would say it was the sciences.
And then you decided at that point to come to college?
Well, let me compliment my mother here. I grew up with a mother who talked to me about college from the beginning. And it just, she always had a desire for me to go to college. And my older brother too, although he didn't finish. But she wanted me to be involved in something in my life that would make me happy. And being outdoors made me happy. And I also took typing in high school, and I was terrible. Now, I can type just fine. I can make a letter happen, and I could then. But on the speed tests, I was not good, and that was what they graded us on. Electric typewriters were the coming thing in the 70s, and you know, some days you got to use the electric typewriter, some days you use the old manuals. And I knew I didn't want a job where I sat at a desk all the time. So I went to college and I majored in wildlife. And of course at NEO-A&M, that was, you know, your first 2 years you get a general experience, and then those classes transferred to OSU with no problem. And then at OSU, I started in on the actual, not just the general biologies, but more the wildlife and the research things, the technical writing, and things like that.
So when would you have arrived at OSU?
The spring semester of 79. I took a semester off, and I did that to work at Yellowstone National Park. And to do that, we left as soon as school was out at Northeastern A&M, and my job duties went into September, which just made me just miss the beginning of college. But I chose to do that and then to stand by that commitment because I really wanted that experience. But I will say this, at Yellowstone, I was a maid. I cleaned rooms. Now, I was a volunteer with the National Park Service, so I'd give a few hours here and there. But I went up there for the experience of being at Yellowstone, not because the job lured me, because being a maid's pretty hard work. But that taught me some really good things. I make a bed like nobody else.
Well, what fun thing did you do at Yellowstone?
I think the fun at Yellowstone was the people I was with, taking a break in the morning, and I'm at Old Faithful because I was stationed at Old Faithful, hiking the trails, and also, again, at Old Faithful, there's a lot of little trails right around there because, I never did do actually backcountry camping and such. I stayed kind of on the trails you could, but around Old Faithful, there's all kinds of trails. But of course, a great deal of fun was, as a park employee, we had these passes, and if the touring buses that took the tourists around weren't full, we could jump on and do those tours. And myself and my roommate, who I have stayed in contact with, she's an awesome person, we would jump on that bus on our days off and just go all over Yellowstone National Park and see and get the benefit of hearing the programs. Mm-hmm. And so that was a pretty neat experience.
I have to ask, did you have a favorite spot?
There was one trail, and I may not be able to think of the name of it, and it might have been the trail to Mystic Falls, or that may not be. But, we live in a dormitory, just barely off the beaten path. And from the dorm, we go this way to work, but if you go this way, you kind of go up one of the mountains near Old Faithful. And it was an easy trail. I mean, it was hard because it was uphill, but it was beautiful, and it was just a walk out the door. So that was, but working in Yellowstone, here's the neat thing. Got there in May, and there's snow on the ground. Left in September, and there's snow on the ground. It was as if I saw the 4 seasons in 4 months. So that was pretty magical.
And then you came back to...
I went, and then I came, and I had so many people say, if you don't finish school while you're going, you'll never finish. And that's just not true. I came back, I got enrolled at OSU, and started making it happen.
Where did you live here in Stillwater?
I lived in a variety of places. I lived with friends in apartments, so I had a variety of different places. I feel like I should have lived on campus. I think that would have mixed me in more with the school scene, because the friends I lived with weren't going to school. Mm-hmm. And so I think it would have mixed me in with the school scene a little more. But yeah.
Did you have a favorite professor or class while you were here?
I had a couple of people who taught me some very basic ecological concepts that really opened me up to want to know and understand more. Jeff Powell, he taught the range class. I don't feel like he made it exciting, but I do feel like I learned a huge amount. I'm sorry to say I don't remember my forestry professor's name, but I took one, I think it was called Man and Forestry. And that really opened my eyes up to the human relationship with the outdoors. And then I took an ecology class, Dr. Fox, Dr. Tates, Dr. McPherson. Now see, those just rolled right out. It was very difficult. And that class was critical to me because I took that the first semester I came over. And the class started out, it was a big class. And when I listened to the questions other students were asking, I became very intimidated. And I thought, I don't know if I can make it here. This is the big leagues now. Because I felt like I just don't know if I'm material for this. And it turns out quite a few of the people that I thought were asking the big important questions dropped the class. But I stuck it out, made a B. So that was a great lesson to learn about myself, was that I can do things, I can make the difficult cuts, and so that was good for me.
And you would have graduated in 81 then?
I think I graduated the December semester of 81. Because remember, I had that semester off.
And what were your plans at that point?
Well, at that point, Jimmy Carter had just been defeated at the polls by Ronald Reagan, and President Reagan wasn't very into science and conservation. And so some of the jobs I might have gotten, I didn't get. But I did get a job. My first job, my real job out of college, was I worked for the National Park Service at Chickasaw National Recreation Area. It was a seasonal position, and that was my first real job out of college. And a lot of what I did was I was an educator with people who visited the park. And I wasn't very good. I had to learn. I had to learn those things. I had to learn about engaging people. I had to learn that I have to research my subject so I'm delivering accurate information. And I think the big thing I've learned over the years is nothing takes the place of helping people have their own quality experience. And so that's why I like to do my education in the outdoors. And that's why sometimes it's really not as much of what I say as helping to put someone in a setting where learning can happen. And those are some of the things I've learned over the years. But yeah, I really liked starting out at the Chickasaw National Recreation Area. And interestingly, the man who was my supervisor became a Blue Thumb volunteer. And we would always joke when we're together, you used to boss me around, now I'm bossing you around.
And how long were you there?
I was there, well, they extended my season, so I got several additional months. And then I worked at a little clothing shop and went back the next summer. And then that was about it. And I met my husband, who's now my ex-husband, while doing that, and we stayed in the area for a while.
Okay. So then when did you switch into Tulsa County Conservation? Well, just take us through the rest of your career. Let's just do it that way.
Okay. Well, my family was in Ada. My small family was in Ada. And I worked for the city of Ada because it was hard to get a job in science at that moment. So I worked for the city of Ada, which really ended up being an excellent piece to add to my interest in outdoor education. Because with City of Ada, I was their public information officer. And so, once again, I'm with the different departments doing things, and I'm writing. I do like writing a great deal. And I didn't say this, but my technical writing class I took at OSU was pretty formative for me, too, in learning how to cut out some of the fat of something and keep it really interesting, but just say what you need to say. So we lived in Ada for a while, and then I went through a divorce. And while going through that divorce, I had lots of things I had to think about. And my parents at that time were living in Jenks. They'd moved from Henrietta to the Tulsa area. And just by chance, on a Wednesday, one day, I stopped and I bought a Tulsa World. And I was looking at the want ads. And there was a position advertised for a manager for the Tulsa County Conservation District. And I took that and I kept thinking about it. And I thought, I'm going to apply because I was divorced, and having that help and that support from my family sounded important to me. And also moving into more of a conservation field. I really wanted to do that. And so I applied for that position. They got a lot of applicants. And they let me know I wasn't their first choice. But their first choice said yes, and then came back and said, no, I can't. And they called me, and I said, yes, I'll take the position. And so that started the ball rolling. And in the winter of 1992, I think I started February 1st, 1992, for the Tulsa County Conservation District. One of the reasons why they were looking for a person was they knew they were going to be receiving some grant money for an urban stream monitoring program. And that is what would become Blue Thumb. So I took that position, and the Conservation District was housed in the same building as OSU Extension. And the OSU Extension horticulture educator, Sue Gray, and I were the ones who were instrumental in starting the Blue Thumb program in Tulsa County. Now, if you want to talk about who thought up the idea and started that ball rolling, there are two people. One of them was Betty Kim, the Conservation District, one of the directors on the board. The other was Gary Bishop, a district conservationist with NRCS, who thought that would work in Tulsa also. So those two people, and then you have John Hassel, who was with the Water Quality Division with the Conservation Commission, who agreed, let's try it. And so they wanted to try it, and Sue and I were the feet on the ground for it.
Was the Blue Thumb program an established program at that time?
No.
You started from scratch?
Yes.
How did you come up with Blue Thumb?
Well, I credit Sue with that. The American Waterworks Association, really no relationship to us, was using Blue Thumb as their promotional logo for several things. And Sue said, I think this would be a good one, and we got permission from them that we could use it too. And then actually, a few years later, they were moving on to a new promotion, and they sent us a bunch of stuff with the Blue Thumb stuff on it. So we went with Blue Thumb. Green thumb if you're good at growing plants, blue thumb if you know how to take care of water. So that's how that was born.
And when was that?
Well, the program started in 1992. Our first class of volunteers started monitoring in 1993.
So soon after you were there.
And the two of you came up with the scenario for what you would be doing?
Not totally. It was water quality specialists with the Conservation Commission, and then a professor with OSU, Mike Smolin. Dan Butler, John Hassel, and Mike Smolin came up with the monitoring plan. And the monitoring plan is really very smart. It's looking at the water chemistry, looking at the life in the water, the fish, and the benthic macroinvertebrates, and looking at the physical features of the stream, the habitat. Now, the volunteers on their own, they monitor monthly for the chemistry. All the other work they do is with the Blue Thumb staff member. So
the challenge would be finding volunteers?
The challenge is finding volunteers. But also, let me flip that around to say that there's a lot of people out there who want to feel like they're making a contribution. And we can give them a program, and if they're interested in the environment, this is a great program to be able to do that.
What was the first, stream or project you tackled for?
Well, in Tulsa, this is kind of unique. We had Fred Creek, and we had 4 sites on Fred Creek. Soon after we had Crow Creek. Up in Owasso, we had Ranch Creek. We did ponds in the very beginning, but we stopped doing that pretty soon. So we had to get people out on ponds, and they would monitor once a month. And we even had a monthly meeting at that time because it was a very small group. We even had monthly meetings and that's when they would do their quality assurance, which is something we're proud of Blue Thumb for. We have a strong quality assurance program, meaning that we're checking the volunteers' work and we're introducing them to new and different ideas. And we want to be sure that what they tell us, their results were from the stream. We want to be as sure as possible that that's accurate. So, but I felt like this was really telling. When we first put volunteers out on sites, one of the groups, we assigned them where they would monitor. And one of the groups, when we told them that they would be on Fred Creek, their response was, "What, that old ditch?" But then as they began monitoring and going to see the creek once a month, and as we started doing biological collections, they never said that again. It became their stream. And that's one of the things I like about the Blue Thumb program is helping people to form that connection with the natural world.
And get invested in it.
Invest.
How many volunteers did you have that first year?
About 40.
40, the first year?
Yeah. Well, we had about 6 teams, and some of them didn't go on to monitor with us, but we had about 6 or 7 teams of 4 people, so maybe a little less than 40, but that's how many graduated from the first class. It's real.
And have any of those stayed with it? Any of those first 40?
We had some that stayed a very long time. None of the originals are with us now, but we do have a couple of the originals from the Oklahoma County area, because Oklahoma County started the next year.
Okay.
It started in Tulsa County, and then 1 year later, everybody was liking what they were seeing going on in Tulsa County, so we started programming.
And you were involved in the Oklahoma County?
Very little. And actually in 1997, a decision was made it would be good to have one person over the Blue Thumb program and take it not just in the urban areas, but broaden it for others across the state who want to do this. And that's when I got the position for the state.
Did you have to move then, or just
No,
work?
and that's why I didn't want to move, because I lived close to my parents, and I'd already moved my children from Ada and gotten them established, and I didn't want to make a relocation. But Mason Mungle decided that I could stay where I was, just have to be in Oklahoma City for certain things, and I'd have to travel. And it has taken a lot of travel, which I've liked, really.
Probably, have you been into every county in the state? Probably.
I believe so.
And this was an Oklahoma Conservation Commission position?
Yes, that took me out of the conservation districts and to the Oklahoma Conservation Commission in 1997 when I took that position.
And while we're there, so when did you retire from there?
2016,
So roughly, okay.
and then worked 2 years for Camp Lockridge as a naturalist. And that education work was discontinued, so I'm very lucky to have applied and been invited to come back to the Conservation Commission. I'm very thankful for that.
Well, what were some of the things they would monitor? You mentioned that they.
Well, looking at the water quality is one facet of stream monitoring, and if you think about it, when you take that sample, that's 1 instant of time for flowing water. So the things that our volunteers would monitor for: dissolved oxygen, pH, chloride, ammonia, nitrogen, nitrate, nitrite, orthophosphorus. We do temperature of air and water. We do water clarity. Those are the primary things. And we know that those particular things may not always show the problem. And here's one of the things, and this is one of the things we would explain to volunteers. One might expect to find nitrates, ammonia, and orthophosphate if there's fertilizer or animal waste making its way to the stream. But we had some streams that we felt like had excess nutrients, but volunteers weren't finding them. But if you look at the stream, it might be full of algae. So the way I would explain it to the volunteer classes is here's the deal. Let's say Thanksgiving dinner is served at Grandma's at 1 p.m., but you have to work till 3. Well, by the time you get to Grandma's house, you see a table with a lot of dirty dishes sitting on it, but no food. But everybody's sitting back with bloated tummies. You know the food was there. But I like to say, and the algae is like your family that didn't save you any food. It has already absorbed those nutrients, and that's why you have excess algae. You may not find the nutrients because it's already taken up in the algae. So that's why good monitoring will have not only the chemistry, but the life in the stream. And that'll be your creek bugs and your fish. And then, of course, we want to look at the habitat. It can be perfect water quality, but if it's nothing but 2 inches of water on a concrete slab, you don't have habitat. So a lot of food for thought, a lot of ecology, and a lot of it is trying to help people take steps in the way they think about, well, if you have this, you might not have that. So it's a systems thinking thing.
Did you find issues with things that you were able to get corrected?
Sometimes. And one thing I will say is we found some sewer line leaks and sewer line breaks, and we still find those. We have found where a pipe carrying oil was cracked, And here's the thing, if you don't have volunteers going out on the site and checking these things, how long would it have gone on? So that's one of the things we really like about our program. And if you go to our website, and you'll have that website in our calendar, you can find volunteer written data reports. And those are our little unsung heroes, which we're singing about it mightily right now at all of our area meetings. We're covering the data reports this year. But when a volunteer has a full set of data, our QA officer sits down with them and all this data, and they look at it together and see what's showing up that would say something about that stream. Then that volunteer writes a report, once again reviewed by the QA officer, and that report exists along with the list of fish that was found in the stream. So that's a very valuable resource you can find on our website. And we have several for the streams in Stillwater. And in fact, I can tell you a little story about some of your Stillwater streams. Boomer Creek. So Boomer Creek at our 2014 fish collection had 7 species of fish. Boomer Creek at our 2019 fish collection had 20 species of fish. What's going on?
What do you attribute that to?
Well, let's think about it. We don't see any huge changes in Boomer Creek, but what has been a massive issue the last few months, especially in the spring this year? Flooding. So we're assuming that big floods dumped some fish in Boomer Creek. But here's the beauty. Let's continue monitoring and let's see what the fish collection in 2024 holds. Because we do fish about every 5 years. We can't do fish every year. That's just too labor intensive, and you don't need to. So let's see what the Boomer Creek fish collection of 2025 holds. It'll be interesting to see.
When did you do it? The year that it went up so much?
This year.
What month?
July.
July. Interesting.
I believe.
Because Boomer Spillway flowed for the second time in its history in May since it's been built.
So, and working in a volunteer stream monitoring and education program like Blue Thumb, I could sit here for another 2 hours and tell you things like that just create the mystery of understanding the outdoor world. It's fascinating.
Have you had cases where you've studied a particular creek and found issues that ended up being corrected in a bigger watershed area that where it was treated to address the issues you found?
We have Crow Creek in Tulsa that the city went in and spent quite a bit of money replacing sewer lines. And we actually have a small watershed project on Crow Creek that volunteers and community members are very active in. So that's one. We had a stream in Oklahoma City that was having constantly high chlorides. And that volunteer, we actually got them a test that would go to a higher range of measuring chloride. And they would measure that. And I'm not exactly sure what all the city of Oklahoma City did, but they took a great interest in it. But I'm sorry to say I don't remember what the outcome was of how they resolved that issue. That might have been resolved during my absence, or I just need to check on it and see.
So you started out with 40 plus or minus volunteers in 92, 93. How many do you have now statewide?
It's very hard to say how many volunteers we have. It's easier for me to say we have about 76 actively monitored streams. And when you wonder about why I don't know more about the number of volunteers, here's the thing, is we have some people who monitor with a team of 2. And we have some teachers who monitor with that semester's ecology class. And that might be 7 people in a small town. And we have some teachers who will bring in water and expect all 3 of their chemistry classes to do the testing. So, but we know we have 76 monitored streams. Well, that's bumped up a couple because every new training, we gain some new, and we've had 3 trainings in the last 2 months. So, I can probably get you that.
How many counties are those 76 streams in?
I would say probably about 40.
40.
So we have some counties that have not come aboard, and we have some counties where it's kind of hard to find running water. And that, of course, would be a relationship with drought, and that's a relationship with drawing down the aquifers to the point that they're not replenishing, because there's a very close relationship between an aquifer and the surface water. So, but we do have a stream monitored in Beaver County out in the Panhandle, and it's spring fed. We right now don't have anything, but for some of the counties that are not involved in stream monitoring with us, we might have education activities that take a groundwater screening to them, because people are also very interested in their groundwater. So we have a thing called groundwater screening, and we do a lot of education with a lot of various conservation districts. We do a lot of education, like they'll call us, they say, we're having this natural resource day. Can you come and present information to the children? And we like doing those, and we're trying to get our volunteers, and we're making good headway. We're trying to get our volunteers more up and running on those kind of education events. And I think what the staff helps the public to benefit from the most is when we're out doing actual work in a stream with people and helping them to learn to understand what lives in your local stream, and to maybe even renew the concept that we share this planet with other creatures. You know, the wildlife that drinks this water, the fish that live in this water, the benthic macroinvertebrates that are going to go through a certain portion of their life cycle and then fly away. There's people who don't know that. One of my favorite volunteer quotes was after the training, a woman who said, I used to look at the stream. Now I see the stream. So that was a person that it was good that we found each other. And I guess, and my passion now, it hasn't changed that much, but now I'm trying to hone in on what are the things we can do in the Blue Thumb program that will help people reconnect with the outdoors and feel a responsibility and understand that living in a healthy community means how you treat your lawn, how you keep your car maintained, what watershed do I live in, how does that affect the stream, how can I help reduce flooding? Well, there's many ways. You can have a healthy lawn, and that's how you can do it. And when people are connected to and feel a kinship with the creatures around them and the land around them, they'll be more likely to be the people who will take steps to take care of the earth and will vote for people who believe that the earth is shared among more than the human species. And that's a lot of what we're about in the Blue Thumb program. We are about helping people make a good connection. And I haven't even gotten into the stuff about how people who spend time outdoors are less likely to be obese. They're more likely to be able to focus. Children that get proper outdoor time, they have less stress and anxiety. So these aren't things I'm making up. These are things that I was spurred by my position at Camp Lockridge to dig deeper into, because I work with children pretty much all day, every day. And I noticed at Camp Lockridge that approximately 10% of the children would say things to me about, well, my grandpa takes me fishing, or my mom takes me to the nature center and we go out on the trails. So I paid attention to that. It was my kind of little mental, non-scientific survey. But that left a lot of children who might actually be afraid to walk out in the woods because, is there a bear here? Is there a lion here? We said, no, you're going to be fine. We want to have a lot of wildlife, and you might see some if you're careful and you're quiet, but you're going to be okay. We did have one child break something because they jumped off of a rock wrong, but that doesn't have anything to do with a bear or a lion. And so that's part of the information that has fueled my desire to help us make good connections happen. And I believe it can happen with adults too. This isn't just a child thing, but it's just a little bit easier to start with a child. And it's not brainwashing them about being a tree hugger. it's about helping them form a connection that will benefit them the rest of their life.
Have you seen any cases where the children, some of the early days, the children you work with now have families of their own and a second generation coming to you?
I can tell you a couple. Here's just a couple of quick little stories. I received a phone call, the Bristow office. This is probably 7 or 8 years ago now, and it was by a guy who worked for OSU Extension, I think in Muskogee County at the time. And he says, "Miss Cheadle, I'd like to borrow that model you have." I go, "You talking about the Enviroscape?" And I said, and he says, "Yes." I said, "Okay, how are we going to arrange for you to pick it up?" And I probably said, "Well, are you a Blue Thumb volunteer?" He goes, "Not presently, but I used to be when I was with so-and-so high school. Our instructor took us out." And I said, "Okay." And then when he came to pick it up, I did recognize him. He came to pick it up, I did recognize him. And he said, he goes, "Yeah, I really want the 4-H kids I work with to understand these connections." That was very gratifying. And then I was at and there's more. I could go on longer, but I'll just give you this one more. I was at Earth Day at a park in Tulsa, I think 3 years ago. And man, it was cold. It was one of the coldest April days. I mean, I had on a hat and a muffler and coats. Everybody did. But I was using the Enviroscape and talking to children. And a break in the activities came, and a young woman came up behind me. And she said, "You may have days when you think you don't make a difference, but you do." She goes, "I saw this presentation when I was in grade school, and I've always thought about it, and I've always remembered what you said about what we apply to the earth can end up in the water and how we can do things that make a difference." And that would have been, if she had seen that when she was 10 or 11, and she was probably 27, 28 at this time. And that was good. And there's actually more of those. And sometimes I'll be doing an Enviroscape with, say, a 10 or 11-year-old, and they'll say, "Oh, I saw that when I was at summer camp in Watonga." And, because we have volunteers everywhere, volunteers can borrow these tools. Volunteers do borrow these tools. And so a lot of what we have going on is kind of a cultural shift, which is very hard to put numbers to. But of course, when you work off of a grant, you put numbers to things. But the cultural shift, I think we've had some really, really good things happen, but it's like any other dynamic program. And I use the word dynamic, and it means changing, growing, looking for new and better ways. We're constantly looking for how to expand our reach and how to make our reach go a little deeper.
Where do you get your grants from, or what types of organizations will give you
Well,
funding for?
There's a couple of ways I'm going to answer that. We have, with the Oklahoma Conservation Commission, they're the designated 319 money or non-point source pollution agency for the state of Oklahoma. So money comes in from the EPA. That's the money that funds a large amount of the Blue Thumb program. Now, what has happened in recent years is Blue Thumb also has Friends of Blue Thumb. And we are a small nonprofit that believed in the cause. And so we raise small amounts of money and we give grants to volunteers, and in some cases conservation districts, who do very grassroots education work. An example I can give you is we gave a grant to a high school teacher in Tulsa who took her students out and did a little creek cleanup. And they needed the knee boots and they wanted to buy grabbers. Our little grant let them do that. We can't use the Blue Thumb state and federal money for those kind of things. And I'm okay with that. But that just emphasized the need for another group that can give money in that way. A lot of the conservation districts use small grants to help them fuel their what we call the natural resource days, where they'll have a lot of educators come out, and typically it's going to be outside, and children from the local schools come and they circulate through these conservation professionals to see their activities and learn about careers, learn about what they can do, learn about the healthy soil, things like that. So some of the money that Friends of Blue Thumb puts out there is for those kinds of causes. And we've had other real creative causes that people came up with. in Tahlequah, we have the stormwater manager. Students made little watershed models. Some of them got to take them home. Some of them gave them to like a class. So Friends of Blue Thumb has been a nice outlet. The thing is, we don't have very much money because we have no staff. We all work on other things. But we've had a pretty good year for real grassroots fundraising. I'm doing on my Facebook page right now, you can do a fundraiser for a cause you love. I'm doing a fundraiser for Friends of Blue Thumb, and when I checked last night, my goal was $500. We have 420 of them. Part of it came from me, but still, the people that kind of know about my passion have said, yeah, I'll give a little bit to Cheryl's grassroots effort there. So I'm excited about it.
Have you been involved in educating legislators? What kind of reaction have you got talking?
That is what I like doing that. It is very hard to be able to pull them in. Now we did have, I believe the state representative came to we had a new type of training 2 weeks ago that I'm very excited about. But we had a state representative that came to that, and he's also the city attorney for Miami, Oklahoma. But it's very difficult to pull in that kind of person because their schedules are tough. I have been on a few tours where they have been. I like that kind of work. I'm excited by it. I would love to do more of it. So if you round some up for me, we'll get them out in the creek. And that's the tricky part, rounding them up.
Have you made any ties with the stream quality and what you found there with the small watershed program? As far as any streams that have been monitored, that's also
that's interesting. And I will bet you if we looked at data on certain streams, you've given me some food for thought. I could look at that. I haven't looked at that.
You think there'd be a tie there?
I don't know. I would think there sure could be. Because you're holding some water back, and of course the small watershed program was about primarily flooding and erosion control. But that's also an opportunity for treatment. So I'd like to know more about that.
It would also increase the base flow where a flush of water would go through, and now you have a longer duration base flow after.
And that's important. We have had since I've been on the job, we've had at least 3 severe droughts. And that has kind of helped me to rethink that whole concept of drought. Is Oklahoma is just going to have times of low rainfall or spaces in Oklahoma. And that's our legacy, is that there will be times when this part of the state is just not going to get that rain. Of course, we've got climate change now. So we don't know how all that is going to impact everything. And the jury's still out on it. But I think the watershed dams, I like your question. And I think we could look at that.
How about on the other extreme where you get large floods and it just flushes out a stream, the impact that has on the health?
That's some of the things that we see with the urban streams, especially because we have so much impervious surface in the watershed. And this is one of the things we go through at Blue Thumb training, trying to help people understand the connections, is that when you have a stream and we'll show up on a slide, a natural area where water can soak in and be used by plants, and a shopping mall and streets and roofs, there's going to be a difference when that water, because in this situation, you're going to have kind of a constant opportunity. In this situation, you're going to have giant flushes, and then when it goes dry, it goes dry. And these are all things that we're trying to make the volunteers aware of, and that we also try to talk to the development community, the agricultural community, because a lot of different kinds of people will show up at Blue Thumb volunteer training. So we hope that we can keep this conversation going. And I always like to emphasize, it's not that I'm anti-development. I just want to be sure we know, so we know to care. Let's be aware of what we're doing. And can we do it differently? Can we do it with a little more kindness? Can we do it so that it serves a purpose other than get it up and fast so we can start bringing the money in? I was asked several years ago by a college professor. I was talking to the students in his class. And his question was, what is our biggest environmental problem? That's a big question for me. I mean, as you can probably tell, I'm probably the least sciencey of all the Blue Thumb staff, and I'm the more people person. But I think I can easily point to greed, and how can I get the money at the moment, as opposed to thinking long term of what is good for my community and my world. And I just think that deserves some conversation in the world.
Now that you've got 25 years of data out there, has anyone tried to take a big picture look at that 25 years to come up with any 5 or 6 main points or conclusions that you can?
I think that may be next. I think that that's something that needs to happen. And I have to be careful because it's really easy for me to come up with ideas of how we should be spending our time. I'm not the supervisor anymore. I was. And I really like the job I have now. But I think I think we need to do that. And I have been thinking about it, honestly, and at least I think looking at temperature data from the early days would be fascinating. Seeing what our temperature data's done. I think that could be eye-opening.
Well, what is your current position?
I am the Blue Thumb Volunteer Coordinator. When I was invited back to Blue Thumb, Jean Lemon was the director, who was with the commission for a long time. And Jean retired less than a year ago. And at that point, they advertised for a Blue Thumb director. And we have a person in there that is doing that position that we're all working very well with. And she has a great attitude about using volunteers, gathering data, protecting streams. And really, I've always wanted to be a volunteer coordinator. And I like this role because my job is education and the volunteers. So, and helping the volunteers to be better and more up and running with the education. Because the more people we have willing to do the good work, the greater the chance that we're going to be able to help Oklahoma's wild places, the animals, the plants, the fish, the deer. That's what we're looking to do, is we are a voice for the voiceless in many cases.
It's citizen scientists.
And we use that phrase. Honestly, we use that phrase, citizen scientist, a great deal.
Have you had to do a lot up in where all the poultry issues are?
Well, Blue Thumb is pretty likely to go where we're wanted. We look and we see, where did we have volunteer trainings last year? Where should we have them this year? We put a lot of thought in that. But certainly anyone who asks us, we're going to take an interest. And that's actually what happened in Locust Grove. We had our Blue Thumb training in Locust Grove just last weekend. And they invited us because they have this awesome exhibit in Locust Grove right now that's through a grant called Waterways. And are you aware of this?
Smithsonian.
Yeah, you want to be aware of this because it is in its 3rd location in Oklahoma. And Waterways will travel next to Fort Towson in the southeast, and then to Altus in the southwest. But the Locust Grove Arts Alliance got a grant to bring Waterways there. And one of the things that they wanted to do, or maybe it was a requirement of the grant, but they're having points of discussion and opportunities for the local residents to learn more and be involved. And so they asked us to have Blue Thumb training at Locust Grove to be part of Waterways and part of what their community needs. So that was a place, and yes, there's a lot going on there. We have had conversations there. Blue Thumb is active with the Spring Creek Coalition, which is just a small watershed group that does good things in that part of the state. And there's a lot of concern. And it's our goal to offer information about how things change and how polluted runoff gets to the water. So yeah, we're pretty busy up there at this moment. And we'll sometimes be busy with, like when there's drought and such, people want more conservation. And in fact, our 2020 Blue Thumb calendar, and this has been coming out for about 12 years now, but our 2020 Blue Thumb calendar is totally about water conservation. And it's got, science teachers can use this, local people. And one of the really cool facets of the calendar this year is we talk about virtual water use. So it's not just your toilet, it's not just how you do your laundry or water your lawn, it's about how much water did it take to manufacture your car? How many gallons of water does it take to help you manufacture a gallon of gas for your vehicle? How much food are you throwing out from your refrigerator that you didn't eat, and how much water did it take to grow that? So it's really a holistic thinking thing. And I really feel like people are going to love this calendar.
How did you get your data for that sort of thing?
This was put together by a Blue Thumb staff member, Candace Miller, and she just did a ton of research.
So she developed the calendar and the data that goes with it?
She didn't do this data, but she found the data.
I see, yeah.
And
Wow.
yeah, it's really neat. And this, and honestly, things like this isn't new information, but this is well laid out so that people will understand. But indoors and outdoors, how can you be a water conservationist? And it's really interesting because a lot of people don't understand that maybe they should be a water conservationist. And I'm from eastern Oklahoma. We got a lot of water. There's very rarely times that we are, that at least me living in a suburban area, not many times anyone asks me to be inconvenienced. And a lot of children I talk to, I'll say, has anybody ever asked you to conserve water? Well, no. Well, that should be a concept that's reasonable. Like, we would not think of going home tonight, and because our clothes are dirty, we throw them away. But we don't think twice sometimes about the way we use water. And Blue Thumb, water protection and water conservation, that's all intermingled. So anyway, we're proud of the calendar this year, and we think it's going to be well received because it's reintroducing a very old concept of, well, save it. That's the first step to protection, is saving it.
Similar to your carbon footprint they talk about. So
yeah, exactly.
I'm guessing you get up in the morning and watch very carefully how much water you use.
I do.
Yeah.
As the days get colder, my hot water heater's in the garage, and my water takes a while to warm up. So what is tempting to do is run it for 2 minutes, and then when it's warm, put the plug in. I've been trying not to do that. I just want to protect water. I want to. It's easier for me to be an effective teacher if I believe it enough to do it.
Practice what you preach.
And here's another thing that we promote with Blue Thumb, and this is a Blue Thumb bandana. It was created for the purpose of, volunteer appreciation. But the thing is when you use a bandana, what are you not using?
Paper napkins.
A paper towel. So you save trees and you save water because water is used in the production. And I joke with the little children, because I work a lot with kids. I joke with the kids, if I fall down, I wrap it around my wound and it'll feel better. If it's an extremely windy day, I can put it on my hair and keep it from blowing. And if I find I'm a little bit short of money and I need to rob the bank, but actually I don't. I never rob a bank, and I always tell them I don't really rob banks. But just to have one of these on me, and I don't know why this one's so dirty, but just to have one of these with you is so handy. I found a baby raccoon, a little baby raccoon, and I go, what am I getting? Because it was like a newborn. I go, I got to protect this little guy. It wasn't with its mother. I didn't steal it. So anyway, I had a bandana. I laid the little baby raccoon in there and cuddled it all up and was able to comfort it, and then I took it to wildlife rehabilitators. So anyway, this
all
is
in a day's work.
all in a day's work. So this is just a philosophy, one of many ways you can help people understand. One of the things I'm doing at home is I have more native plantings in my yard, and I'm trying to encourage neighbors and others to have native plantings to bring in butterflies and to help the pollinators. It's a whole big puzzle to which there are many small pieces, and sometimes people think, well, what I do won't make a difference, but it really can, especially if you're encouraging others. It really can make a difference.
So how many days, like in a month, are you out in a creek, out in the field doing that type of thing?
I am out less because I'm no longer one of the staff members that meets up with volunteers to do the work in the streams. So,
But before you switched,
before I switched, I would probably be in a creek a couple of times a week. But what I really like is when I'm in a creek, and we were in a creek Saturday and Sunday. And Saturday's portion, that was with our volunteer training. And what we liked about what we could do on Saturday is we showed people the life of the stream and talked to people about how we make collections and about a clean stream will have diversity. We'll find something living in a clean stream. And we looked at the fish, and we looked at what was living on the rocks and the gravel of Spring Creek, one of the creeks we talked a little about. And we will put a creature in the hand of a child or an adult, and we get their hand wet, and we help them understand that now you're showing empathy for a creature because they're uncomfortable, because they live in the water, and you get them out of the water, let's keep them comfortable, and we can study them. And so we offer some good lessons, I think, on caring at a very basic level that I think people will really take into other facets of their life.
and then you put it back.
And then we put it back. And sometimes that's one of the things I really like to do. And if we have a bucket of fish and I have a few children, but I can say, okay, because yes, you can just pour the bucket back in. But I'll say, would you guys like to help let the fish go? And if our lesson has done what it should, and it almost always has, these young people that will reach their hands in so gently and then put them back in the creek. And that's heartwarming to see. And I've actually been with groups of people before, and because we do mixed groups where we'll have adults and children, where we'll stop what we're talking about and I'll say, no, just watch the children as they let them go. And it's really encouraging. They'll just put these back so gentle and so kind. And that's just a lesson, all of us. And it's a reminder. It's a reminder to us to wake up in the morning, look around us and say, I've got some things to be thankful for. And if I can go out into the world and help others to realize the value and beauty of their resources, that's a pretty good job.
Have you had to work any with endangered species or?
Well, we have to be aware. In our streams, we have to be aware. There's a couple of darters that we don't want to collect because if we find them, we just leave them alone. And that's hard to identify darters. So we have to know about things like that. But the big thing that we have to know about is just what the communities are. What is the community of a certain stream or river look like? So, and I guess the Arkansas River Shiner could be one species we'd want to watch out for, but our field staff is very good. They know their fish, and we have a good quality assurance program. So I don't really worry that we're collecting things that we shouldn't be leaving, but we are trying to help the volunteers be aware of what we're doing.
About how deep would these, I'm sure the streams are just little.
We want our volunteers working on wadable streams. And a wadable stream, that doesn't mean it might not be over your head in a place or two, but for the most part, we're going to be able to walk down most areas of that stream and be able to pull a seine. So there can't be a whole lot of places overhead. Now, we have monitored a couple of rivers, Polecat Creek, which is a river, it's a river, and the Deep Fork River, we have actually monitored. And we aren't on those now because they're just too big. We know that we can't make a good fish collection of every available habitat because it gets too deep. Although we've gotten good collections from both of them, but we've learned, and there's some safety elements in there too.
You don't run up across snakes.
That's frequent. Typically, snakes don't want to be in our company any more than we want to be in theirs. We have had volunteers that said they've gotten snapped at. To our knowledge, we have had no snake bites of our volunteers, and the Blue Thumb staff has not had a snake bite.
Oh.
We've had scares.
And turtles.
Now that's one of the scariest things you can do is seine up a big snapping turtle. That's frightening, but it makes for a good day to talk about after the fact.
So talk about some of the tools of the trade when you're out doing the monitoring. What would you?
Well, I wish I had brought nets, and let me see if I've got a couple of tools right here. Of course, the tools of the trade for our volunteers is their test kit that they do their chemical monitoring with. And right here is a tool of the trade, which is a seine. And I really like this because this is an old tool. People were making seines hundreds of years ago. And the seine will ruin you for fishing with a pole. Because if you're in a pretty nice creek, you usually come up with something when you pull that seine. And it has been one of the wonderful things with Blue Thumb that we have been the group that gave a lot of people their first opportunity to seine. Now, I will say this is a change I think I'm seeing. When Blue Thumb first started, and I would ask the question, is there anyone here who has never pulled a seine? 25 years ago, most people have pulled a seine. We're getting more people who haven't had that experience, and we're giving it to them. So they can pull the seine, then we come up on the bank and we see what we caught. And that's a great experience. We also have kick nets that we look for the bugs with. The benthic macroinvertebrates, and this is our kick net. It's 1 meter square. And we disturb substrate above the net, and the flow carries the things that we've disturbed into the net. So you're going to have bits of aquatic vegetation, some gravel, some sticks, and hopefully bugs that live in the water. Because there's a lot of things that live in the water, and we're trying to find them. And we then take some of these, we preserve them, and look at them to see what our insect community is. Now with the fish, we do keep some specimens, but most of the fish are released. We don't keep very many, but it is science, and we have to be able to say that, yes, we know we caught it. Here's an example.
As far as the tools, have you seen innovations in the last 25 years that have changed the way you collected or how you collected, or better collection of data? Or are you still using about the same?
Interestingly, we have changed some of our chemistry kits due to better ones. But we still just rely on Hawk field kits because they're affordable. And chemistry is so tricky. There are so many things we could be testing for. It was really hard to narrow down to what, and that wasn't my job. That was our Mike Smolens and Dan Butler's who came up with that. What we'll test for. So we've had some changes with the chemistry. The nets are essentially the same. Now, if we did electroshocking, my answer would be yes. But because we're a volunteer program and we have people in the water with us when we're doing the collections, we really don't like having the electroshocker. It's an effective tool, and it helps us, the water quality specialists need that. We know that if we don't use that tool, there may be some things we miss. But it just wouldn't be a good plan for us to have electroshocking. So let me think. I noticed that our staff this summer used a thing called a rangefinder, which is just, that's not a new innovative tool, but they're improved now, instead of our string to measure our habitat distances. So that might be a new innovation. And of course, the computer programs that we input the data into, and then we have the metrics that they run through to help us understand what this population of this creature means. So that's typically done by people other than myself, but that is very helpful in producing documents that say, this is what we have going on in your stream.
Mm-hmm.
And that, once again, I will refer you to the Blue Thumb volunteer data reports that talk about what their stream is like. And they'll have, it depends. Some volunteers write a 2-page summary. Some volunteers write 25 pages. Some volunteers do 100 and put graphs in them. So the data reports very much reflect that volunteer and where they are in the spectrum from sciencey person to not so sciencey.
How long have you been doing that, though? Since day one, or just?
The data reports? Mm-hmm. Probably 12 years. Because we struggled with that. We struggled with... I was not good at data interpretation when I would look at it. Now, we had QA officers who were, but when you have 80 streams being monitored and this data coming in, it just made sense. And that wasn't my idea. I went to a National Water Quality Monitoring Conference, and one of the volunteers that I met, Candace Wilderman, I believe is her name, Dickinson College, and she saw my frustration, and we were talking about it, and she says, Cheryl, I suggest you have volunteers write their own data reports. I was like, that's brilliant. Mm-hmm. And so then our quality assurance officer, Kim, she puts together all of their data. And you have to have a complete data set. A complete data set is going to be, at a minimum, 12 months of chemistry, winter bug collection, summer bug collection, and a fish collection, and a habitat assessment, which goes with the fish collection. But typically the data set's much larger. And that's put together for the volunteers. And we talk to the volunteers about what it means, primarily Kim, and they might be intimidated at first, but they just find a way to dig in. They often have questions, and then they get back to us with this data report. Kim reviews them, and the big thing is we have all the data, and the volunteers just trying to put it in some words for the layman. And that's another place where I take a great deal of pride in the Blue Thumb program. I feel like the bulk of the world doesn't have a good grasp on real science. And I feel like our volunteers are kind of a buffer between the hard science and the average Joe, kind of like me. And those volunteers we are working to help them to be scientifically literate. And some of them already are when they come to us, so that they are in a position to understand and talk about. When they hear it, they kind of get it. And then when the people who don't know as much about it have questions, they can talk about it.
Has this Blue Thumb program or the concept of it expanded to other states now?
Well, most other states have some kind of volunteer stream monitoring program. They can be very different. Arkansas has stream teams. I think Missouri might have stream teams. Texas has several different watersheds, and in their watersheds they have their own way of doing things. Now, Blue Thumb was created by people less in the social sciences and people more who thought data collection was a good idea. And I like that, because Blue Thumb, if you want to come aboard with us as a volunteer and you want to monitor a stream, you will do this. And it's laid out. And if that's not what they want, no hard feelings. Thank you for coming to Blue Thumb training. Or do you want to help us educate people? Because we can check out some tools to you, and you can go to a school and be effective in that way. But basically, we are a data collection, high quality data. Volunteers are well trained. We have a good quality assurance plan, and that's the program we offer our volunteers. And we have a lot of people say, yeah, I'm interested in that.
Is there a national association or organization with similar type programs?
Well, we do have, every other year, there is the National Water Quality Monitoring Conference. And with that conference, there is a volunteer portion that's very big, very important. And we try to go to that, and a lot of other groups do too. beyond that, there used to be a really nice little newsletter that came out for volunteer monitors, and I don't think that's still going.
Have you ever hosted a national conference?
No,
like
but
that?
we've hosted regional. And yes, we've hosted regional conferences. That doesn't happen a lot. But with Blue Thumb, we actually have every other year a volunteer monitoring conference for our volunteers. And we will be having that in 2020. And in the last few years, I don't know how familiar either of you are with the thing called Project WET, Water Education for Teachers. For the state of Oklahoma, that has become a part of Blue Thumb. So the Project WET conference for a 4-state area is going to be held in Oklahoma, and that's going to be broadened to include Oklahoma volunteers for Blue Thumb. So we'll be looking at putting together a really good conference that will help educate the volunteers and that will be attractive for them to show up to. Some will be able to come, some won't. We'll try to have a student portion that maybe some high school teacher will want to bring kids to. So anyway, that's in the future, and we do that every other year. So that's an even years thing. We had a big 20-year Blue Thumb event that we had a lot of people at. Then we had one in Oklahoma City.
So staff-wise, it's you and how many other people?
4 people.
4 people.
We have a director, 3 field educators, and there are a lot more than that, but that's what we'll call them, and myself, a volunteer. And all of us do a lot of additional education. Just, we try to say yes when someone says, will you come talk to my so-and-so group? We try to say yes. So we're all very involved in going out with outreach and trying to help people understand who and what we are, how to get involved, and taking care of your local streams.
You carry your waders in your car?
I don't, but I always carry galoshes, so I can just, walk out and do things. As Larry knows, part of my early career with Tulsa County Conservation District was I went and looked at a lot of construction sites because they weren't doing a very good job of erosion control. So that's the time I started keeping galoshes in my car, and I always have ever since. And didn't necessarily always make a lot of friends.
Just tell it like it is, though.
Well, that was just where we were at the moment. We were trying to have these erosion and sediment control trainings for cities and developers. And we were just trying to help people become more aware. There are things you can do to stop this. It might take a little money, though. So I don't do much of that anymore.
So you've worked in rural and urban. Can you talk the difference in the...
Yeah, we definitely, rural and urban, definitely, from high school in the middle of Tulsa to Wyandotte, Oklahoma, to Sayre, Oklahoma, where we have high school kids involved. And definitely, I always felt like in the rural schools, I would hear the high school kids talking more about, well, I went hunting, I went fishing. I think I heard more of that in the rural areas. So I don't know if it's the same. I think that we have lost a lot of young people's outdoor recreation to screen time.
Screen instead of stream, yes?
Yeah, I think that that's shown. We battle that. We try to. But we also have, I'm the oldest Blue Thumb person. Some of the younger Blue Thumb people work on doing things. Well, what can they do with their cell phone out there? So, and that's speaking of new technology. We're working on an app so that when the volunteers are at the stream, they can just enter data. So there you go. That just didn't come to me a while ago.
And design a scavenger hunt, I guess, for them. Can you find, these 10 things in your stream? I just saw an outdoor scavenger hunt advertised for something. So yeah, absolutely. That's probably the next big thing. And that's probably when I need to get out, because I can go to a stream and take photos. Oh, I can submit them. I guess I can do it. Why not? Do you have a favorite day or favorite experience when you look back over your 25, 30 years doing this? Anything? Well, I've had some very... A day or two just pop.
I've had some very good experiences. I've definitely had some favorite days. And there are many, they're numerous. I will say that we are starting something between the Blue Thumb program and the Conservation Commission's Soil Health program that I'm very excited about, because we have come together. We are forming a kind of a combined Blue Thumb and Soil Health workshop, and we're calling it Full Circle Citizenship. And when you're talking the soil and you're talking the water, there's so many things in between that's fair game for trying to present and talk to people about. So I like the idea of this, because we're talking about watersheds, we're talking about soil health, we're talking about infiltration, we're taking a field trip to the stream, and we're going to add a component that might fall under a heading kind of like reading the landscape, because to help people learn that making connections. What would this have been like before? What's the history of your area? You know, and one of the things I was paying attention to while we were having our first one of these, which we've only had the one, and it was abbreviated, but we had aerials from the district for over a course of about 60 years. And people love that. They love to see what happened in 1935, what happened in 1960, what happened in 1982, and to see the land changes. And then we want to be able to introduce it in that kind of a way, and then we'll go out and look at the land. You know, do we find tracks? Do we see evidence that somebody has done a managed burn? Do we see a dead tree that's been dead for a long time, and what is that tree good for now? And just help people see the outdoors as a mysterious entity, but one that it's fun to try to understand. And again, it's all about trying to form that connection. But other times, I would just have to say, I would say the other times are probably, one day that rings a bell to me is this was a tribal workshop, and it was in Tulsa. We went to an urban stream, and then we went to a second urban stream, but that had a lot less people in the watershed and had a lot more natural area in the watershed and a good riparian zone. And we compared the two. We found 2 species of fish in the stream in the heart of Tulsa. We found 7 species with the same amount of effort in the other stream. We found more things living on the rocks. And to be able to compare and talk to people and watch the wheels turning, that's a good day, because you know you've helped someone make a bit of a leap, because they hadn't done that before. Another really good day was simply, and this is indoors, but at Drumright, we often get invited to their VOTEC open house, and we took Enviroscape, and I had done the spiel many times by the time of the day I'm going to tell you about. I'd done my spiel with Enviroscape many times, and I had to abbreviate it, because you can see when people start getting tired of listening to you, and you got about 30 more seconds to start wrapping it up. But I had some people come back around after I just, finished the spiel. And I had one man who never said a word, but he's probably 25, and he was kind of standing at the back, but where he could see well. So we went through the spiel again. It was clear to me that there were some mysteries being unlocked in his mind as he was watching how the water moves over the little model, how it picks up the colored pollutants and takes it into the lake, and where do you get your drinking water from? You could see the intensity with which he was watching that was making a difference to him on this day. So those are, and I remember other moments like that, because, my bread and butter has kind of been volunteer, so I work very hard to get to know people a little dab, and to make eye contact, and to know something about who and what they are. But I will remember him and that look on his face, and I think something good kind of came down the pike that day. I always like it when I'm out in a stream with mixed ages, like a family and kids. We did a fish collection one day where we met our volunteers on a stream in Ottawa County. And when we started part of it, there was a family, a mom, dad, and 2 little girls and a little boy on the other side. And it was just out on a country road. I mean, this isn't a swimming area, but it's out in the country. They were out and enjoying. And anyway, we worked for about an hour, and then we came back and we were getting a drink. But I kept watching the little girl, and I was listening to her. What is that? What is that? And so we took the net over there, and we caught some stuff. And we just showed these little children what this was that they were seeing, because they were asking. I could hear them asking. And we showed them stuff. And we went ahead and started our work again, and those children immediately ran over to pull the parents in the water with them, and were showing them. And with the same interest that the children had, mom and dad are suddenly starting to look at everything. I mean, don't bug me, I'm looking, So that was a good day. I remember some specific moments just out on the creek with just a few of us doing work that might not have even been with a volunteer, where you got, this time of year is a favorite for me, where you've got the wind and the leaves falling, landing on the water. I have some scenes kind of emblazoned into my mind that anytime I return to that thought, it's a good experience.
Have you been back to your stream in Henrietta?
I have. And I recently went back and took photos. That little stream, the nearest house, it's part of their yard now. And it might have always been, but it was still kind of like public property. And they do mow down to the stream, but it still looks okay. But, and it's more of the stream is less distinct in this area. But if you go look across the street, it's kind of a wild area, and then it's just a few yards on to Coal Creek where it empties into it. So I've taken actually the photo of the creek the way it's managed now, and a photo of the creek the way nobody's managing it. So, but yeah, I go back to it.
Yeah, I wondered.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of be drawn back to it.
You are. I think we're drawn to places, and in fact, the sound of a babbling brook is, I think, deep in all of us as a place where, I can get water. So I think we all kind of perk up when we hear that sound of the babbling brook.
How about smells? Do certain smells trigger?
Mm-hmm. And I love the smell of healthy soil. And so a lot of times when we're looking at rocks and stuff, but yeah, and of course in streams, often in the urban area, you have the smell of death because somebody dumps a dead dog. But that's less pleasant. Why do we need to go there? But yeah, a lot of smells.
Yeah. And do you want to talk a little bit about the rain garden project? Is that something that's still going on with Tulsa or not?
I'm probably not the best person to talk about that. I believe in rain gardens, and I think that there's some good, and we do, we have had some good locations where we've had effective rain gardens, but I'm not certain that is written into, and it's not in the Blue Thumb plan at this moment. But I'll tell you what, that might be the kind of thing, if a volunteer wanted to put a small rain garden in their yard and they would be willing to talk to people about it, that might be a Friends of Blue Thumb grant to that volunteer. So we like to be open to ideas.
Okay. And then do you do other types of work with Indian nations, with different tribes?
We like to work with tribes. We frequently will have a tribe send their new staff members to a Blue Thumb training because we introduce monitoring and stream ecology, I think, at a really good level. And some of the tribes will go ahead and work with us, and some of them go ahead and do their own thing, but we retain a good working relationship. We have had tribes that come with us or with our water quality specialist to see our collections. And we have tribes that ask for standard operating procedures. So I like the relationship that we have with several tribes, and we're always open to helping and working with tribes.
And you mentioned specimens. How long do you keep these? And where do you keep them?
That are preserved?
Yeah, for your data
Well,
stuff.
We have a room in the Bristow office that's got a lot of preserved fish and some preserved bugs, and I'd have to look at the SOP. They've changed it in the last couple of years. We used to keep things for a very, very long time, and I don't think we have to keep them as long anymore. Because here's the deal, if we say we found a very, very sensitive aquatic insect in the larval stage in a stream, And people say, no, I don't believe you. I don't think that stream ever had anything like that good in it. Well, if we go back to that sample, because we may not have looked at the whole sample, because we look at a community, and it would take forever to look at the whole sample of bugs. So we might be able to go back into that sample, pull out a portion, and once again see if we could find that thing. So, but I don't think we have to keep them for a very long time now. A lot of times we donate our preserved fish to like college labs and stuff.
I wondered if you take a picture and digitize it, it would become part of.
We do
record
a
that
lot
way.
of photo documentation. We do a lot of photo documentation, so because we don't like to. I mean, the benthic macroinvertebrates, we have to preserve the sample. Then we look at them at a later time. The fish, we keep a voucher specimen so that we know what we've got. And then if we can identify, and that's why, the whole staff goes to fish school. And fish school's hard. But the whole staff goes to fish school, learns about the different fish and the different species and how to identify them. So, and that's part of our quality assurance.
And I guess you could say, which streams can you eat the fish from?
That's really other agencies, but there's a lot of streams. Yeah, you want to think about that, and there's often some information about that.
Yeah, I mean, ones that you would probably not eat
Probably.
from.
But you got to remember that the streams that we work are very small,
Yeah, the little
typically, and we
minnows
don't.
and such.
I mean, but now there's Pennington Creek. They got a 35-pound catfish out of that. But Pennington Creek's not a little creek. It's a big creek.
There's some interesting names for creeks too. I've noticed.
There really are. One of my favorites is in the Stratford area. It's called Spring Brook Creek. Like, could we just not make up our mind what this thing is? And, yeah, and Skeleton Creek. There's some interesting names. And I have at sometimes researched stream names. Like there's Fushmaline down in Latimer County, Crooked Fork, or Evil Fork, That's a French set of words.
You've come full circle then from your days on the creek to actually coming and helping preserve and maintain and improve and whatever.
Well, I'm one of those fortunate people who loves what they do, and I see purpose. I require purpose, and I believe that we are all part of a very beautiful whole system. And I think to have gratitude for what we have and to be willing to protect it is very important. And people who don't have any knowledge about it won't know how to protect. And so I really like to share my interest in the outdoors with people. And people often really enjoy it too. But you just got to get them out there.
So if you were going to give someone, say, 5 things of advice that they could go do themselves to help.
To help the earth?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say you might find where you'd like to be a volunteer. Maybe it's a master gardener. Maybe it's a Blue Thumb volunteer. Maybe it's with a Boy or Girl Scout troop. But pass on kindness to others through volunteering. I think that's good. I would say do a little audit of your life and how you use water, how you use electricity, how much of your food goes rotten before you can get it eaten, and do you take recycling seriously? Is that available in your community, and do you do it? I would say look at your life and see how you can be a steward in some of those very, very easy ways. It might just be filling up your washing machine, not just washing a couple of shirts. So those are easy stewardship ways. And I would say learn something about your area's natural history, about your area's actual history, and spend time outdoors. A lot of why people enjoy bird watching is because when you bird watch, you become familiar with the familiar birds, the things that land in your yard frequently. And when something lands in your yard that you hadn't seen before, if you've been doing this, then you go, oh my, and you try to identify it, you try to understand what brought it to your yard, And those are some of the things that connect you with the outdoors. I would look at what were the animals that would live in your area. Like of course, you probably have white-tailed deer, fox, coyotes, squirrels, harvest mouse, beaver, and learn something about those creatures that you would share locally. And you probably no longer have bear or mountain lion. And you might think, well, good, who wants those? Well, they aren't exactly what you want to see standing on the street corner. But again, I'm going to bring this up. We share the earth. And is it right to just eradicate something from your life? I don't know that that's 5, but those are the things I would say is broaden your experiences and soften your heart to the other creatures of the world. I think that's critical. And appreciate the wild places and lobby in your community for some wild places. Like I've recently gone to a park department to say, you're doing a good job of keeping the parks looking really nice, but you could leave a few places slightly less mowed, and that could do some good things. Or you could do some pollinator plantings and be good to the butterflies, birds, and bees. So, just be willing to not only maybe help your yard, but talk to your neighbors. And, and that's not always easy. Having conversations with others about, well, you should think like I do, but there's nice ways to approach it. There's good ways to approach it.
So, and then where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? Continuing to do this or doing something totally different, or 5 years?
Well, I'm going to be 62 in a couple of days, and I honestly don't know. I've been thinking about it and thinking about what I would like for the rest of my life. I take care of myself, and I'm very energetic, so I think I've still got some giving to give, and I honestly don't know.
Okay. Yet to be determined.
Yet to be determined. But I'm very appreciative of the Conservation Commission for thinking I still had a home with them.
And thank goodness you picked up the newspaper that day.
I know, and I think about that, and I don't believe really that there are coincidences. I believe that there's a path, and we often get on it, and I like to have a little gratitude that I see life that way, because it makes me have more confidence in the choices and such. And some of the choices that weren't that good, they probably led to something. And I've had tons of opportunities to make mistakes and grow from them. So that's been a blessing on the job too, and in personal life.
Well, is there anything else you want to ask, Larry?
Well, just that calendar comes out each year and all. If someone wanted to get a copy of that, how do they go about?
Well, we try to have them in local conservation districts. We encourage conservation districts to take calendars home with them and we're traveling to all the area meetings. And that's a good way, your local conservation district. And any Blue Thumb staff member is probably going to have them. But they are an annual activity. And like I say, this one, I think we're going to have a lot of teachers like them, because I think they're going to be very good for class discussion.
Well, they're a very good training resource for year to year.
They are, and we have a different aspect that we cover. Like last year, we covered local wildlife. And we just covered a lot of things on our sidebars. One year, we covered all the different Blue Thumb tests that they run each month. That was a fun one, too.
Anything you want to say that we haven't thought to cover?
Well, it's very kind of the History Committee to invite me, and I appreciate being here, and I think Oklahoma is a wonderful state. We have such diversity, and I think we want to see it protected and be a good place for all of us.
Well, then my last question is, when history is written about Cheryl, what do you want it to say? How do you want to be remembered?
Well, I hope it'll be remembered as somebody who cared and tried to pass it on. Tried to help others understand.
Well, just from listening to you today, I think you can check that.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's been great.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Larry.